College was supposed to mark a clean slate for me, a chance to leave the past behind. But no matter how far I ran, the shadows of my old life clung to me like a second skin. I told myself this was my shot to start over, to bury the memories that felt like chains, dragging me down. At first, it seemed to work. Hundreds of miles separated me from the house I grew up in and the ghosts it carried. Around new people, I could wear a different mask, shape myself into someone I barely recognized. That's when I met Tessa. She wasn't like anyone I'd ever known. She had this magnetic energy, a confidence that felt almost reckless, and being around her was like stepping out into the open air after years in a locked room. Every night, we'd find ourselves in some new adventure, house parties, late-night cramming sessions, or sprawled out on her dorm room floor, laughing amid the haze of incense. One night, as we sat on her futon, she handed me a joint with a mischievous smile. "You're like a blank canvas, Katie," she said, her eyes glinting with mischief. "Just waiting for life to leave its mark." I laughed nervously, admitting I'd never touched a thing, no weed, no alcohol, nothing. Her grin widened at that, like she'd just found her next big project. I wanted to let go. To drown out the echoes of my past and feel something, anything, besides the weight of it all. So, I took the joint, inhaled, and let the world blur at the edges. The warmth and softness felt like slipping into a different skin, one that wasn't scarred by memories. Tessa leaned closer, her voice dropping into an almost conspiratorial whisper. "Have you ever tried lucid dreaming?" I exhaled a thin stream of smoke, shaking my head. "No." "What is it?" Her grin turned playful. "It's like stepping into your own magic. You control your dreams. You can be anyone, do anything, no rules, no limits." Her words echoed in my head as I lay in bed that night. I repeated her instructions, letting myself sink into the haze, my breath slowing with every inhale. The dream started out like a memory, but something about it was off. I was back at the lake my family visited every summer when I was a kid. The water stretched out before me, pitch black under the moonlight, as still as glass. Everything around me was washed in silver, the quiet suffocating, the air thick like syrup. That's when I saw her, a little girl standing at the water's edge. Her red dress fluttered in a breeze I couldn't feel, and her wild, tangled hair framed a face that didn't seem right. Her smile stretched too wide, unnatural and unsettling. Then she laughed, a sound that echoed too loud, bouncing off the trees like a twisted melody. She ran, her bare feet splashing through the muddy shore, and without thinking, I followed. Each step I took felt heavier, dread building like a weight in my chest. I tried to call out, but my voice wouldn't come. My throat was tight, my lungs burning like I was drowning without water. She stopped suddenly and turned to face me. Her face warped into something monstrous, eyes black as pits, mouth pulling into a grotesque grin. "Catch me, Katie," she whispered, her voice a raspy echo that crawled under my skin. She took a step back, slipped, and fell into the water. Her small hands reached for me, clawing at empty air. I lunged forward, mud pulling at my feet, but she was already gone, swallowed by the lake's darkness. Then the water turned red. I shot awake, gasping for air, my skin slick with sweat. My heart thundered in my chest, the taste of lake water sharp on my tongue. Even in the safety of my room, I could still feel the dream clinging to me, thick and oppressive. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself it was nothing, but when I glanced at the mirror, my blood ran cold. She was there. Her distorted face stared back at me, her grin stretching wider than it should, her eyes dark and endless. The days that followed were a blur of unease. I threw myself into classes, clung to moments of laughter with Tessa, anything to escape the lingering shadows. But no matter where I went, she was always there, in reflections, in the corner of my vision, her small hand reaching toward me, always just out of reach. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? No one would believe me, not even Tessa, who seemed open to anything. So I kept quiet, letting the nightmares drag me deeper. Out of desperation, I tried lucid dreaming again. This time, I found myself in my childhood kitchen. The air was heavy with the sour tang of cigarettes and stale beer. My dad sat at the table, his face obscured by shadows, a half-empty bottle in his hand. He didn't look at me, but I felt his presence like a weight pressing down on my chest. He took a slow sip from the bottle, his movements deliberate, like each one carried a purpose only he understood. His eyes were locked on something distant, something I couldn't see, but I felt the weight of his thoughts as if they were pressing against my chest. "Perfect Emily," he muttered, his tone thick with bitterness and something darker. "Off at college, living the life she stole." I opened my mouth, ready to defend myself, to tell him it wasn't true, that I missed her every single day. But before I could get the words out, his eyes shifted to me. They were cold, empty, and his gaze froze me in place. "You should have been the one to drown," he spat, his voice turning sharp, his face twisting into something inhuman. "It should have been you." His words struck like a blade, slicing into a part of me I didn't know was still raw. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were rooted to the floor, my voice trapped somewhere deep in my chest. His face grew larger, warping and stretching until his hollow eyes and gaping mouth consumed the room, consuming me. When I woke, I was shaking, his words echoing in my mind like a curse I couldn't escape. The line between dreams and reality felt like it had vanished completely. Even in the daylight, I could still feel his presence, a shadow that seemed to linger in every corner, watching, waiting, judging. It wasn't just him. She was there too. In the corner of my eye, I'd catch glimpses of her, the distorted, haunting face of my sister, her fingers reaching toward me, her mouth stretched into that chilling, silent scream. Reflections in windows would show my father, his eyes locked on me with that same empty, accusing stare. They were always gone in an instant, but the echoes of their presence stayed, gnawing at my mind. At night, there was no escape. My dreams turned darker, pulling me into grotesque, nightmarish versions of my past. Each one felt like a doorway to something I desperately tried to leave behind. They weren't just dreams, they were memories, twisted and wrong, replaying everything I feared most in ways I couldn't bear to see. The third time I tried to lucid dream, it was more out of anger than anything else, a desperate need to take back control. This time, I found myself at Anna's funeral. The room was packed with people I didn't know, their faces blurred and hollow, their expressions frozen in judgment. My mom sat at the front, her shoulders slumped, her face hidden in her hands. The air was suffocating, heavy with the cloying smell of flowers and something sour, something rotting. I moved closer, each step making my chest tighten, the air growing thicker around me. When my mom finally looked up, her eyes were rimmed red and swollen, her face blank except for the weight of her gaze. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. The accusation was there, burning in her empty eyes. I tried to speak, to explain, to beg her to believe that I was sorry, but my voice was gone. The words wouldn't come. I turned toward the casket, my heart pounding in my ears. Anna was lying there, so still, so small, her pale face framed by her dark hair. Her eyes were open, staring right at me, and that awful, twisted grin stretched across her lips. And then, suddenly, she moved. Her body jerked upright, her head tilting to one side in an unnatural, bone-snapping motion. Her mouth opened wider than it should, her silent scream filling the room without making a sound. Her hands shot out, icy fingers clamping around my wrist like a vice, pulling me forward. I tried to resist, but she was too strong. Her rage burned in her eyes as she dragged me into the casket with her. I woke up screaming, my throat raw, my wrist still cold where her fingers had been. The sensation lingered, like her grip was burned into my skin, and I couldn't shake it. The line between the dreams and my waking life was gone. I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. They found me curled up in the corner of my dorm room the next morning, trembling, barely able to breathe. My skin felt clammy, my mind a fog of fear and exhaustion. I'd clawed at my own arms in some desperate, instinctive attempt to rid myself of the memories, but nothing helped. I couldn't remember the last time I'd spoken to anyone, not even Tessa. The world I'd built for myself had crumbled, and I was left alone, with them. Every waking hour, I felt their presence in the shadows, watching me, waiting for me to fall asleep again. And I was too weak to keep fighting. The harsh glare of the hospital's fluorescent lights blurred as they wheeled me down the sterile hallway. My wrists were strapped to the gurney so tightly it felt like I was some kind of threat, some wild animal they couldn't risk setting free. I could hear their voices, doctors, nurses, calm, detached, like I wasn't even there. I begged them, pleaded with every ounce of strength I had left, please, don't make me sleep. But they just ignored me, their eyes fixed on their tasks, oblivious to the shadows crawling over my skin, the horrors that waited behind my closed eyelids. The room they brought me into was small and stark, white walls, white ceiling, white floors. Empty. But not to me. To me, it was alive with faces. They were everywhere, peering out from the corners, staring at me through the cracks. Anna's voice was there too, whispering in my head like she always did, her words sharp as a blade, "It should have been you." My father's sneer joined hers, my mother's silence filling the gaps. All of them were there, watching, waiting, hiding just behind the light. A nurse leaned over me, holding a syringe. Her voice was soft, almost kind. "This will help you relax." "No," I rasped, my throat dry and raw, but the word barely came out. I felt the cold sting of the needle as it pierced my skin. The sedative spread through my veins like liquid ice, dragging me under, pulling me into a darkness that felt alive, coiling around me like a predator closing in on its prey. The room blurred, the fluorescent lights above flickering like dying stars before fading altogether. For a brief moment, there was nothing, no sound, no faces, just the still, merciful quiet of oblivion. But then the darkness began to move. It twisted and churned, shapes forming in the void. Faces emerged, familiar yet monstrous, their features warped by hatred and rage. They came closer, stepping out of the blackness, pale and bloated, their eyes full of malice. Anna was there, her dead eyes boring into mine, her mouth stretching wide into that hideous grin that haunted every corner of my mind. She wasn't alone. My father was next to her, his hollow face twisted in fury. His voice cut through the silence like a blade, his words dripping with venom, "It should have been you." The hospital room was gone, melted away into the cold, unyielding waters of the lake. I felt the ground beneath me dissolve as icy waves surged around my legs, dragging me back to that day, that place. Anna's small hand shot out of the water, her fingers like iron around my wrist, pulling me down. Her nails dug into my skin, cold and sharp, as her laughter echoed in my ears, high and cruel. Her face hovered above me, her expression contorting into a grotesque scream that had no sound but tore through me all the same. The water swallowed me whole. Beneath the surface, the lake stretched endlessly, a yawning black void filled with faces. They floated in the depths, their eyes glowing faintly, their mouths open in silent accusation. My father, my mother, even strangers whose faces I couldn't place, they were all there, their hands reaching for me, their icy grip dragging me deeper into the abyss. I struggled, gasping for air that didn't exist, my chest burning as the memories and shadows wrapped around me like a net. Every mistake, every regret, every dark thought I'd ever had twisted together into a suffocating nightmare. Their voices screamed in my head, a cacophony of blame and anger that drowned out my own thoughts. Then the lake floor disappeared beneath me, and I fell. I plummeted through an endless void, a darkness so complete it felt alive. Anna's grip on my wrist tightened, her nails digging deeper as her laughter echoed all around me, a sound that was both maddening and triumphant. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My voice was swallowed by the abyss, just another drop in its infinite depths. I kept falling, tumbling endlessly through the black. The faces never left me. They were there, waiting, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The judgment in their expressions never wavered. My father's sneer, my mother's emptiness, Anna's rage, they circled me, pulling me further into the void. I wanted to fight, to claw my way back to the surface, but I knew it was useless. The truth was as cold and unrelenting as the water around me. They hadn't come for me. They'd been waiting. And now, I was theirs. Forever.